Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for making it here at the iGEM Green Insights booth. So today, I'll be talking about utility-scale solar PV power plants, and particularly, I'll be doing a case study for one of the projects we did in the Philippines. This gives you an outline of what my talk today will be about. So I'll start out with a brief introduction of Conergy, the company, and also the Philippine solar market so that you get an idea of the context in which this case study operates in. Then I'll follow that with the proper case study and also and close that with some of the lessons learned that we've had as the EPC contractor for this project. So to start off with a brief introduction on Conergy. So Conergy is a German solar PV solution provider. In particular, we focus on building large-scale, megawatt-scale solar PV grid connect plants. With respect to how we're organized in Asia, so we have our regional headquarters in Singapore, which is where I'm based out of. But we do have operations in other parts of Asia, in particular Dubai, which is responsible for the Middle East, Bangkok, which is responsible for our business in Thailand, Japan, so Tokyo, and also Singapore. So from Singapore, we manage the rest of the region. We also have a rep office in the Philippines, and fairly soon that will be a legal entity. But other than that, we do work with partners in the rest of the region. So we do have partners in Indonesia, in Malaysia, which we cover remotely out of Singapore. So just a brief background on Conergy. So as I've said, Conergy is a solar system provider. Many years ago, we used to be a manufacturer, so we used to own manufacturing facilities for modules, for mounting systems, and for inverters. But since then, well, as of last year, we decided to get out of manufacturing and focus on our services. So in particular, our EPC services and our O&M services, plus project development and project finance. But because of our long history as a manufacturer, we know what makes a good module, we know what makes a good mounting system. So we still have those relationships in place. So what we do now is we still have Conergy modules, but they're now OEM'd with top-tier solar manufacturers. And so we use all of these components in many of the solar projects we build. So this next slide just shows you some of the projects we've built in the region. So we've had projects in South Korea, in Saudi Arabia, in France, Germany, in Japan. And you see, as you can see, they're a combination of rooftop systems and ground mounting systems. But one other thing they have in common is they tend to be of a larger scale. They tend to be of a megawatt scale. So that's really the space we operate in. And this next slide shows you some of the more recent projects we worked on. So as you can see, we've done a lot of projects in Thailand. In particular, we've installed and commissioned over 100 megawatts in Thailand alone. We've also built projects in the Philippines, so we've had 30 megawatts already built. And so now, moving on, let's just take a step back and try to understand the Philippines a little bit better, and in particular, the Philippine context. So one of the reasons why Conergy was interested in the Philippines to begin with was because we felt the Philippines had the ideal conditions for solar, and that's in many respects. So in the first, one of the key aspects to consider, obviously, first is the irradiation in the country. So the Philippines just so happens to be blessed with very good irradiations. So, we're looking at figures from 1,600 to 2,000 kilowatt hours or 5 kilowatt hours per square meter. It's an archipelago, so there are some challenges, but there are ways to go about it. But one other interesting fact that attracted us to the market is that only 70% of the households are electrified. And even within the areas which are electrified, there's still a severe shortage of power. And in particular, in the southern part of the Philippines, it's very common to have blackouts or rotating blackouts. And then with respect to the Philippine economy, it's been very healthy the past couple of years. It's been one of the stars of Southeast Asia, I'd say, with GDP averaging between 7 to 8%. Also, we have a very stable political structure now. We have a stable government in place. So really, as a German or as a foreign company, we're very interested. We were very interested to pursue the Philippines because all of the conditions, the key drivers that would make a solar project successful could be found in the Philippines. And one of the supporting programs behind that is some of the plans that the Philippine government has made. So I won't go through all the details, but from that list you can see that between the National Renewable Energy Plan, the Philippine Energy Plan, the Missionary Electrification Plan, basically the government is serious about improving the electricity structure in the country. They're serious about moving into renewables. So again, this was an added incentive for us to get involved in the Philippines. But maybe if you were to distill, the fine print in those programs and in those laws, that translates to certain benefits if you're a solar champion or a solar investor. So in particular, if you were, let's say, a solar investor, if you built a solar plant, you could potentially enjoy tax incentives such as an income tax holiday for 7 years. And then once the 7 years is over, you still have a much reduced corporate rate of 10%. Importation of key solar components was allowed VAT and duty-free. And so really a lot of incentives. And in terms of also the feed-in tariff, a feed-in tariff system is currently in place for large-scale solar. So it's currently set at 968 pesos per kilowatt hour, which comes to around 24 US cents per kilowatt hour, which is quite attractive. But that's currently in phase one. If you were to move to phase two, we estimate that that figure might go down a bit. But in any case, it's still a good, healthy figure. And then also, there's accelerated depreciation would be allowed for such solar companies and all that. And one other interesting program is also net metering. Metering is now in place in the Philippines. The utilities Meralco and VECO are actively getting into this. And the net metering system applies for solar systems up to 100 kilowatt peak. Yeah. So now moving on to the case study itself. So as I mentioned, Conergy has built a 22 megawatt solar park in Negros Occidental. This is in the Visayas region. So if you look at, let's say, the map of the Philippines, you have 3 major islands, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. And this particular plant was built in the middle island, the Visayas region. For a number of reasons. Number one, there's a shortage of electricity in that place, and also there is a transmission line between Visayas and Luzon, so any excess power could potentially be transmitted to the Luzon island. And also, from a political standpoint, that's a very safe location, and our German investors felt comfortable investing in the Visayas region. So maybe just to run down through some of the project specifics. So as I've said, this project was built in San Carlos City in Negros Occidental in the Visayas region. It has an installed capacity of 22 megawatts. The amount of energy it produces annually comes to around 35,000 megawatt hours. We used some 88,300 PH Conergy modules. We also used 22 central inverters, so each central inverter effectively managed 1 megawatt. Mounting systems, these are ground-mounted solar linear systems, which you'll see pictures of a little later. The size of the plant was 350,000 square meters, and the projected CO2 emission saved per annum comes to a little over 18,000 tons per year. So now, how was the project structured? So in our case, as a foreign vendor, we could only do part of the work. So we had to partner with a local company. In our case, we partnered with Schema Consult, which is a Filipino engineering construction company. So Conergy, as the EPC contractor, did the overall engineering and design. So we effectively did the design for the solar plant. So if you can think of an architect That was our job, right? So we did all the blueprints. We figured out, how should the modules be connected? How should they be structured? What's the distance between each module array? Let's say, what types of cables should you use? How should you connect each string, and how should you connect each inverter? So we did the overall project design and engineering. We also did the procurement because, as a global player, we're able to operate very efficiently. We're able to pass on the savings that we gain by purchasing a large number of modules, let's say. For all our global projects, when you look at the volume that we purchase, we're able to pass on those savings to our customers. So we're also in the procurement business, and also engineering. So in the case of this project, as I've said, we did the overall conceptual design, we did the main components supply, we did the commissioning for the project together with our partner, and the warranties and the guarantees obviously are our responsibilities. Whereas the local partner did the local civil engineering and design, but together with us, of course. They also did the local component supply, so the purchase of, let's say, cables, transformers, and all that. And they did the installation. We would supervise, but the manpower to do the installation and the commissioning came from them, and also some O&M. So if you look at this next slide, this shows you a blueprint almost of the site. So you're talking about several thousands of modules fitting into this piece of land. So one of the reasons why San Carlos City was chosen as the site for this project is because it's becoming an RE hub. Because prior to Conergy building this solar plant here in San Carlos, a biomass plant already existed there. So, and really it's been a goal of the governor and some of the local businessmen to really transform this area into a renewables hub. So the solar plant complemented the biomass plant that was already existing in the province, in the city. And then the 22 megawatt solar park was actually divided into two phases. So there was phase 1, which was 30 megawatts and 9 megawatts. The timeline was around a year to build the project. The first phase, the first 13 megawatts, was actually commissioned just this past May 14. And even the president of the country flipped on the switches to turn on the plant. And in terms of the second phase, that's already done. So mechanical completion has been done. We're just in the middle of scheduling the actual commissioning for the second phase for the balance of the 9 megawatts, because that has to be coordinated with NGCP, the National Grid Corporation of the Philippines. So we're just waiting for a representative from the company to work with us for the commissioning. And then, but one reason why this project is really very important, because this represents the first large-scale commercial plant, solar commercial plant built in the Philippines. So it effectively proved the concept that yes, solar can be viable in a commercial scale, and it can be viable in an emerging market like the Philippines. And one thing interesting about this project was it was fully financed by equity. So the money came from a German asset management firm. And the reason why it was fully financed was, number one, they had a tight deadline. They wanted to meet the feed-in tariff deadlines. And also there are some issues about financing locally, because banks aren't that receptive yet to solar, but slowly they're getting into that. But at the point when we first signed this contract, the customer was insistent that the tight schedule be met. Therefore, they were willing to fully finance the project expenses themselves. So it was 100% equity financed. So maybe let me walk you through some of the steps in building a large-scale plant, just so that you get an idea of how it works and how it's built. So the first step is the civil works. So you have to mobilize the site. So you have to build the shelters, the office, the warehousing, because that's the first step. Components have to be delivered, and they have to be put in a secure location where they will be protected from the environment, and they would be protected from theft, let's say. Then site boundaries have to be identified and marked. The side roads have to be constructed. the ground had to be leveled and compacted, because if you don't compact the land, once you stick the pile into the ground, if you don't compact the land, that can further, push. I mean, the structure can further sink, which is not what you want. You want the solar to be at a good height from the ground. So land compacting was done before any installation was done. And we also did some excavations for the drainage system. So that's basically the first step. Then in the next step, the second step is now you're looking at mechanical installation. So you have to erect the mounting structures. So in this case, the piles have a concrete foundation. And so foot plates and piles were installed. Our ground-mounted solar linear mounting system was also installed. And once the mounting system was installed, then the modules were laid and clamped onto the structure, and also finally the fence around the park was done. Then once the mechanical installation is complete, that's followed by the electrical installation. So basically all the cables had to be strung together. The step-up transformers had to be put in place. The inverters had to be installed. The cables had to be laid and all that. So next, this just shows you what the timeline was like for the project. So if you look at it, you don't have to look at the details, but if you just look at the blue bars, you'll notice that a lot of the tasks were done in parallel, because truthfully, it was a very, very tight schedule. Because as I've said, the customer wanted his deadline met, because the way the feed-in tariff system in the Philippines works is that whoever completes first is the one who gets the preferred feed-in tariff rate. So it's a first come, first served basis, or it's a first to build basis. So that's why, and no one knows, what your competitor is doing. So our customer really said, you've got to build this, as per the schedule, because if, let's say, another solar plant is built, which, with a capacity of 30 to 50 megawatts, that's it, because then the feed-in tariff allocation is taken up. So that's why we had a very strict timeline. So that's why I think with this chart, it illustrates just how tight everything was. Everything had to be done in parallel as much as possible. So some of the lessons learned from our experience was that, because this is our first solar project in the Philippines, we had to work on our relationship with the customer and also with the partner. This is our first time to deal with this customer and first time to deal with this particular partner. So even if we've had, 100 megawatts installed in Thailand, the situation obviously is still very different for this project. It's a new country, new market, new partner, new customer. And even if the customer is familiar with biomass because they have a biomass plant, solar was still very new to them. So we had to walk them through, what was essential, what was required, what were the key aspects of solar. And then same thing with our local partner. They had experience in solar before, but those were more smaller scale. So we had to train them up. We had to get them up to speed with what's required when you have a large-scale solar project. Then we also had to adapt to other local requirements. So because, let's say, the site was in a relatively more remote location, we had to figure out what's the most optimal way to deliver the components. And also from a technical point of view, we had to understand the voltage, the frequency, and the local requirements, which is why, let's say, for the inverters, we had to use only a particular brand, because other types of inverters, even good inverters from other countries, are not suitable for the specs in the Philippines. As far as weather was concerned, this was really tricky because the initial shipments was planned around the period when Typhoon Haiyan hit. So in fact, what we had to do was we had to hold back some of the deliveries because we knew, this major storm was going to hit. So, you have to be aware of all these issues and really understand what's going on in the local market. So because of that even tightened their schedule. So again, because we had a very tight schedule, our logistics person had to be very creative, had to find ways to get things delivered, because after Typhoon Haiyan hit, there was a shortage of trucks. All the trucks by the local trucking company were diverted for relief aid. So obviously, but then we had a tight deadline, so she had to be creative. She had to find ways to get trucks to deliver to the site. And then also BOI approvals. As I mentioned in the earlier slide, the equipment was eligible to come in duty-free and tax-free. But before you can do that, you have to have the BOI certificate in place, the BOI exemptions. And as many of you who have done business in Manila know, there are delays. But then again, so you have to be prepared for that. And then also the Grid Connect company. Because solar is very new to the Philippines, we had to involve the Grid Connect company even at the start or as soon as possible so that there would be less hiccups, so they knew exactly what to expect once grid connection was scheduled. So as for the results, as I've said, no matter how experienced you are from an EPC point of view, every new project has a new set of challenges because you're dealing with new players, new customers, new partners. So don't take that for granted. Don't assume just because you've done this before, everything will go smoothly. So really, it's a learning relationship. And also, nothing beats having the local knowledge. So working with a local partner. And then one thing helpful for us also was we used our proven designs. We didn't reinvent the wheel. So a lot of our learnings from all our different projects around the world, we sort of standardized them. So then that really helped us be cost efficient. That's one, and it also allowed us to meet our deadlines. Local permitting, just like that BOI clearance I described to you, all the local permits are subject to delays. So you have to be prepared for that. You should try to really monitor and push, the local parties to get those permits in place. Because if not, those can delay your project. And as I've said, because the feed-in tariff comes with a first come first served basis, you don't want to miss, the allocation just because you were a week late and that because you had one permit late. And then interconnection, which I mentioned earlier.